Hello, everybody. Can we start? It's my great pleasure to invite you to follow this roundtable on the theme of South-North dialogue to help achieve SDG 2 and 13 in Africa, an agricultural revolution for sustainable food security. That's quite a long title for a roundtable, don't you think so? It is because the subject is very complex, but it's at the same time an acute political issue which needs both policy, science, investment, private sectors, all stakeholders who I have the pleasure to have around this table. So I will be moderating this roundtable. I'm Elisabeth Clavry de Saint-Martin. I'm the CEO of CIRAD, a French research institute working in agriculture, especially in tropical agriculture and subarid agriculture in more than 60 countries. And I will have the pleasure to welcome for this session Hicham El Adbi, who's the president of University Mohammed VI Polytechnic, Charles Tellier, chief of staff of president of IFAD, Patrick Dupoux, senior partner, director of Africa of the BCG, Jennifer Barn, Director of Partnership of AGRA, well known. Philippe Mauguin won't be here, but he is represented by Ségolène Allais-Desfontaines from INRAE, also a center research working on agriculture. Marjeta Jager, Deputy Director General from INTPA. And Anan Mourchid, Sustainable and Green Industrial Development Director from OCP, and Bertrand Wagner, Deputy Executive Director from Agence Française de Développement. So, on these themes, perhaps we will start with one question. It's about Africa's potential. It is a theme which is highly controversial. Finally, Africa, has it the means to feed its population and to bring response to environmental challenges? Can it do right now, alone? Where does it stand? You can read everything on the press that Africa is starving, that Africa is exporting. So perhaps I will ask Charles Tellier, who is in IFAD working on the ground, and then Anan Mourchid to give us their views on the subject. So please, perhaps, Charles, go on.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and welcome everyone. Glad to be here with all of you. So the question is, let's start with that. What are the challenges? 80% of the world's poorest people live in rural areas, and obviously even more in Africa. 33% of global arable land is degraded. Weather erosion, salinification, acidification, and if nothing is done to stop this, by 2050 we'll have 16 million square kilometers which will be degraded. That's about the size of South America. In Africa, between 2015 and 2020, we've had 4.4 million hectares of forest which were lost. And 65% of current arable land in Africa is degraded, and desertification stands at 45%. So that's the size of the environmental challenges that we are facing. And of course, the dilemma that we have is that we need cheap and nutritious food in urban areas, whilst not depressing farm gate prices. And that's where the crux of the difficulty is, right? 60% of African households depend on agriculture and on agricultural activity in the wider sense. So there's a huge potential for poverty reduction. That's SDG 1, not SDG 2, but the two are extremely closely related. And if we look again rapidly at the global numbers, smallholders produce 30% of the food on only 10% of land. So there's an enormous potential, and in Africa in particular, the question is, what is the solution for this? Is it about increasing production? That seems like an easy solution. It's not. And as we've seen, otherwise we increase quickly degradation and exploitation of land is not necessarily the way forward. So there is a huge potential, fortunately. But the question is, how do we transform African agricultures so that we drive a local, sustainable, inclusive, productive transformation of the food systems? And how do we do this? There's many, many ways of doing this, and they have to be combined. That's the real crucial point. Better inputs, so better seeds, blended inorganic fertilizers, innovation, technology, using indigenous and local community, traditional agroecological practices, reduce losses. There's huge, huge potential to be tapped in reducing losses. That's, storage and access to market. Basically, it's about inserting rural smallholders into the national, regional, and sub-regional value chains. The question is there. Once we've done this, we can have options if we also promote plant protein-based diets, if we ensure that we have more locally produced, more drought-resistant produces. I think that was one of the goals of the G7's Food and Agriculture Resilience Mission. Sustainable farming practices, but deploying capital, including through the private sector, investing in production, in value chains, blended finance, investing, of course, in inclusive finance, carbon credits. And this cannot be done by any institution. IFAD, of course, is the leading agricultural development finance institution, but it needs partnerships. We have AGRA, we have the African Agriculture Transformation Initiative. Nothing can be done, on our own. And we, as a development finance institution, we blend together finance from the Green Climate Fund, from the Adaptation Fund, from other sources, and try and have comprehensive programs that incorporate smallholders, their communities, into local value chains. I've got plenty of examples, but I'll come back to that later.
Thank you for this very comprehensive analysis. Anand, OCP is working a lot in Africa. So do you share the analysis of Charles? And what can you see on the ground? Which are the needs and which kind of solution can you see?
Well, thank you very much. I cannot disagree with all what has been said by our friends before, because Africa has a huge potential, and this is a factual thing when we look at the figures. Actually, the climate crisis and the food security crisis are global crises, but the solution can be African. Why? Because when we look at the figures, actually, Africa contains 60% of the world arable lands, the largest in-tapered potential of arable lands, and the yields can be increased up to, FAO, for example, up to 50 to 113% if we use the good practices and sustainable agricultural practices, and if we address the bottlenecks that the African continent is facing. And while addressing this issue of the yield gaps and the productivity in the African soils, we can address in the same time the climate issue by using the potential of these lands as a carbon sequestrator. So when we look at the African conditions today, we notice that the average of the yield is 25% of the world average in Africa. And the use of fertilizers, especially in 1/10 of the global use, which puts a lot of questions on the ground. So what we've been doing at OCP is trying to address all the parts of the supply chain and all the value chain of the food systems, starting from the inputs, by bringing quantity and availability, but also bringing quality of inputs, especially fertilizers. So we adopted what we call a science-based approach to analyze soils and to develop customized products that bring the exact nutrients needed by crops and soils and make them close to the farmer through local production, through blenders. We've been working on logistics, railroads, routes, etc., to make sure that the farmer will get access to these inputs. But we also worked on affordability, because there is the input issue, there is the access to materials, to raw materials and so on, but there is also the financial means that these farmers need to complete the whole cycle. So we developed some holistic approaches, like what we call agri-booster disposal, that we included partnerships with the financial institutions to develop specific financing tools to farmers, and then to help farmers to get access to the market in the end, and to be able to reach to help their products to reach to the market and to be sold, because it's also a part of the issue. And this cannot be done if we don't rely on multi-stakeholder partnerships, on local institutions, private partners, public partners, financial institutions that work hand in hand with us to make this possible. So these examples show how far we can definitely address the yield gaps and the sustainable farming agricultural practices implementing on the ground through partnering, but also through embracing scientific solutions. And it also shows how far the potential of Africa is there and how it could be a global solution to this global issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's very clear. And we can see that both the potential, and you underline it very clearly with the question of the yields, and at the same time, the challenges. And Charles rightly underlined the question of degraded soils, the question also of smallholders. And at the end, surely one part of the solution lies in empowerment, and empowerment lies in training and research. So that will be my second question, is what role for research and university in Africa, so that they can take Africa at the right level concerning production and modernization. I would say agroecological intensification. So perhaps I will give you the floor first.
Okay, thank you so much. So just to begin, I do agree with all what has been said, and we could see that as a very big challenge or a huge opportunity. And to do that, for us, we see that as a huge opportunity for state-of-the-art in terms of research. If we want this new green revolution in Africa, it needs to be done by leveraging on research and science. There is a really huge potential there. And at UM6B, for instance, we are working a lot with universities in sub-Saharan African countries, in different countries. The first thing and the most important asset is the soil. And it was said how poor are the soils in Africa. We know to move and further, deeper in this knowledge of the soil by soil mapping, leveraging on different technologies, not just the what we call the wet chemistry. There is the dry chemistry. There is the analysis of the satellite images that could help us. And there is an ongoing experience right now in Côte d'Ivoire, in Senegal, Rwanda, and Kenya. And in the next few weeks, we will have a soil mapping for these countries with even information about the yield, about the crops are growing there. So this is number one. Number two, at the university, we believe in the link between the research and the farmer. That's why at our College of Agriculture, we have what we call the extension agents who are on the field, who are working daily with the farmers, and their goal is to understand what this, because in Africa, the farmer has just 1 to 2 hectares. So it's a huge huge demand for information, from science, from knowledge. So we need this link, and we are investing. We have more than 100 agronomists on the field in Morocco, trying new ways of doing agriculture. The example this year is the no-till agriculture. So we have 25,000 hectares. And to enhance the productivity, in some areas last year, we got plus 40% in terms of productivity regarding the classical way of doing agriculture. And we are trying to measure the carbon sequestrated in the soil thanks to the new application of these new ways of doing agriculture. So the farmer, at the end of the day, will enhance the productivity and will sequestrate more carbon, and we will monetize this carbon sequestrated for the farmer. So we are linking the two SDGs, 2 and 13, between fighting hunger and fighting the climate change. Last but not least is in terms of capability building. That's why we are partnering with a lot of institutions like the CGIAR, where we are now launching a program to train 100 PhD students from Africa regarding the different African soils, different agriculture. The second one is a partnership with GPAL to see the policy point of view, because to introduce new ways of doing agriculture, you need some support from policymakers. That's why we launched 1 month ago a partnership with the GPAL in five African countries. This is just to give you in a few what's going on regarding the science, the research, innovation.
Thank you very much, Hicham. That's very ambitious. I'm quite impressed. Ségolène is representing the INRAE. INRAE is working mostly in temperate agriculture with a global ranking very high in research in agriculture. Still, INRAE is very interesting in what is going on in Africa, and especially because in Africa we are talking about global challenges we all share. Climate change, biodiversity, sustainable food system. I like the word system because we are all implied. And at the same time, the research community does not have border, north-south nor north, and they have been working together for quite a long time. So, Ségolène, could you give us your point of view?
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to give me the opportunity to talk about, in particular, concerning Africa, one initiative built with around 20 research organizations and universities in more than 10 countries throughout Africa. This initiative is SARA initiative about transforming food system, as you said, and agriculture through research with Africa. The aim of this initiative is, of course, to contribute to the Agenda 2030, and in particular, of course, the SDG 2 on food security and agriculture, and 13 on climate. Why? Because we do think that food system and agriculture are at the very heart of the needs. This initiative has a vision to strengthen international cooperation to promote more productive, resilient, self-reliant and sustainable food system, and to contribute, of course, to food security and sovereignty, but also nutrition, job creation, in particular for young people, gender equity, adapting and mitigate also climate change, preserving natural resources like soil that was mentioned a few minutes ago, but also water and forests, while safeguarding environmental, human and animal health. And concretely, this initiative is impact-oriented research, acting at different scales, intercontinental scales, because we are at least 2 research organizations in Europe already involved, but other organizations or University of Europe will join us, probably maybe beyond Europe, will support this initiative. So to build this network at different scale between continents, Europe and Africa, in the continents, bringing together different scientific communities from different horizons, with different language also, I must say, and acting also at the national level. How we want to work to transform this food system and agriculture, I would say we have a chart with values and principles around scientific integrity, around open science, solidarity, reciprocity, and will not develop too long. And finally, my last point is about the way we want to work is to deliver through concrete research projects, through training of students. For instance, we will have PhD students directly under this umbrella, and we have a framework to deliver concrete substance. And finally, I would just want to say it's just a start. We have the first General Assembly last December in South Africa in Cape Town. Next one will be in Senegal in January. But what we really have collectively as a goal is to transform the food system and also to transform the way we are working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ségolène, for this presentation of the TSA initiative. We strongly support and believe in. If we could take a picture of the flows of imports and exports in agriculture in Africa, roughly Africa produces 80% of what it needs. But it's a bit more complicated than this. It means that we do not have only to deal with, I say the international community, we do not only have to deal with this 20%, because in this 80% you have food which is designed for population, for the African population, but you also have a lot of exports. And African countries, they need both, because they also need the revenues from the exports so that they can invest and modernize the country. So this is quite a difficult equilibrium when you're an international organization, and that you have to help, partner, and find the way really to design the policy, at the same time fit it for the global sustainable way where we want collectively to head to, but at the same time also fit it to what a particular country with its need, its population wants. So I will give the floor to Margetta from the DG IMPA, because the European Union is really a very big actor in agriculture, and surely she has a lot to say about this.
Thank you very much. First of all, I fully agree with Ségolène that profound and urgent transformation of global agriculture and food system is needed. So this is my first statement, and of course it goes without saying, if you want to reach SDGs, Agenda 2030, Paris Agreement, etc., this is needed. And I believe that this is the recognized fact now at all levels, and especially confirmed at the UN Food System Summit. And you will also understand this is in the heart of all Commission's, I would say, documents, from the Green Deal to Farm to Fork to 2030 biodiversity strategy. And I think that this Paris Peace Forum is giving us a great opportunity to brainstorm of how to deal with these challenges in front of us, especially following a very, I would say, troubling trends on the growing population. Let's say if we go to 2050 to up to 10 billion people, and we need at least 60% more food production, not to add then the climate change and other, let's say, challenges that we know, and especially now even it's more urgent in this polycrisis from pandemic to wars that we are facing. So insecurity, food insecurity is in the rise. So that is clear. I mean, not only because of demographic and climate change, but also there is the main question that I would like to ask to all of us is how to produce more while going green, so while decarbonizing, because this is the solution. Of course, we are trying to find it first at the EU level. As you said, we have a huge agriculture portfolio, but also I would say that now in the Team Europe approach, we built a global food insecurity, I would say, basis that is on 4 pillars. One is solidarity, and I can tell you that for the short term, we put now 4.9 billion in the short-term solution in the last 3 years. But also in the medium term till 24, only the European Commission will come to 8.3, and together as a Team Europe on 18 billion support. So this is a substantial support, I would say, from the EU, but nothing will be done without the sustainable food production and the resilience. And we are talking about food sovereignty, autonomy, and that it's needed. Of course, we need to change the trade and how we are doing business, and of course effective multilateralism. So you ask me how internationally, we can do more. As international organizations, I think we all have the obligation and the commitment to work much better together, to work in full synergies, to support each other, to collaborate. I mean, we have daily collaborations with the 3 Rome-based agencies, but also we need to work really with the financial institutions, with the World Bank and our EIB bank. We have a huge portfolio. We are going not only to blending, we tried with the guarantees, but not a lot of appetite because it's still considered too risky. Exactly, but I mean, we are still willing to do and more, and to see if there is additional possibility to ensure access to finance, because this is key. I mean, for small farmers, for food systems, for value change, for change. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired by the end of the day, but also basically to do about agroecology and the future productions that we would like to have. So we have so many international initiatives, such a global network against food crisis. We have a G7 process. We have food security and UN Global Crisis Response Group. We are heading towards the summit here in Paris in 24-25 on the G4 for food security. And honestly, I would say, and I will stop with that, we need really to use this time to collaborate at all levels to put together a very positive, sustainable agenda, what we are going to do on increasing the food production, sustainable food production, while decarbonizing, as I said, and also, how to deal with trade, with the full value chains, agri-value chains, and also what is the future of, let's say, for us, it's agroecology, especially for small farmers. It's proven to be very efficient. And to answer your question, yes, Africa is absolutely capable to produce enough food, but we need really to help them in order to achieve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I know the French Agency for Development, AFD, has always been very supportive of putting Africa at the center of the transition globally for a new sustainable development. But at the same time, we heard from Margetta how complicated it is because of the question of risks, because of the question of finding the right balance between intensification, growth of production, and at the same time preserving biodiversity and the climate issues. So from the point of view of AFD working on the ground for quite a long time in Africa, which solution could you advocate?
Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for hosting this very interesting conversation. I think that on the basis of what others said around the table, that there is one very important and key things at the heart of the issue that we are discussing today, and that can be summarized as having countries with sound long-term agricultural policies. And this is something that we've been working on with several countries in Africa for long term, and we need, and when I say that, I always compare what happened, what took place in France after the Second World War, when the French government decided that we had to become a sovereign country and we had to secure our own food production and food distribution to the French citizens. And it's perfectly understandable that African countries want to reach the same kind of sovereignty. And on the basis of what was done in France, I think it's the long-term view that the ministries of agriculture at this time, that the views they took, that enabled France at that time to develop all that has to be in place to provide with food security. Training is one very important issue, and Hicham mentioned it. We also had the opportunity to discuss it a little earlier today. The agriculture of today is much more skilled and probably requires much more than what it used to be 50 or 60 years ago. And you mentioned satellite data that can be used to analyze the soil content and to compare the yields that are provided by crops. These are definitely areas where we have huge opportunities to move much faster into the kind of fertilizers, agricultural techniques, and so on that have to be embedded into any kind of production. So there are huge opportunities that are provided by technological change. Satellite data is one of them. Mobile payments is one of them, provided, once again, that you have the sound agricultural policy at the country level that is in place. And another one is obviously weather forecasts and any kind of data that can be provided to farmers so that they can develop their crops. So that's one important issue. The second one, and I'm very pleased to see Marjeta here today. We had the Global Gateway meeting 2 weeks ago in Brussels. There's one huge paradox in Africa, which is the level of the salaries, which is very low when we compare to our own countries, but the price of food, which is very high. And one of the reasons why the price of food is so high is because of the lack of infrastructure. So it costs a lot to move food products from one place to another one. One of my friends from AFD, Papa Amadou Sarr, in a former life, financed fridges for farmers to secure their crop and to make sure it would not be rotten after 1 week or 2 weeks when it was harvested. And that increases the price by levels that we have no idea of the amount of those levels, more than 50, or sometimes it doubles the price of the crops when it is sold in the markets in the cities. So infrastructure is a huge opportunity to bring more food security, because you will lower the level of food which is destroyed by the lack of means of transportation and the lack of means of conservation. And this once again requires a sound agricultural policy. One way to address risks, the levels of risk will remain for some time. But one way to address those levels of risk is to provide investors and to provide partners a 5, 10, sometimes even 15 or 20-year view on the policy of your country and the view you take of what your agriculture could be in 15 to 20 years time. So long-term policies that requires training up to very skilled levels that were not necessary 50 or 60 years ago, and that has changed. But it is also an opportunity to increase yields and to adjust the fertilizers, if we take the example of OCP, that are provided to farmers. Infrastructure is one important area where we need to focus. Research, Sirad, I know, we work together in several countries on seeds, on agricultural techniques that are implemented by farmers. And what's interesting is that there's the technique, but there's also then the change that has to be implemented in the field with local people. Because when you've been doing it one way for 50 years, and because your family has been doing so for maybe 200 years, changing the way you cultivate things and changing the way you seed you implant and you plow your fields and you implant seeds, it takes a lot of time. And that requires, and that will be my final point, very strong partners locally. We need professional associations, be it for corn, be it for wheat, be it for goats, be it for cows. We need very strong and highly skilled associations locally who will be able to talk and convince the farmers to change the way they produce agricultural products. And that, once again, needs to be embarked and embedded into sound long-term agricultural policies.
Thank you, Bertrand. I really share all the points you made as a conclusion, and they're very relevant. And I really liked your introduction underlying where we were in Europe just after the war, and underlying also what we did wrong, especially land degradation, inequalities, lack of development, rural development, and that we still pay today. So we do not have any lessons to give, but we have the experience of some failures, and this we can share them. So I think this is, when I go to Africa, I cannot share the Afri-pessimism that you can see in some papers, because what I can see that people learn very rapidly, and that they know the failures and the errors that were made elsewhere, and that's very important. We've been talking a lot about small orders, value change. All this is the private sector, because agriculture is a policy, but it's people working on the field, working on the ground, whether they are smallholders, whether they are agribusiness. You have such a diversity of agriculture in Africa, and the solution will come from all of them. So from this point of view, from the private sector point of view and the solution which can emerge, I will give the floor first to Jennifer from AGRA, and then to Patrick Dupont from DCG.
Thank you so much, and it's really good to be here. And specifically because, of course, as the head of partnerships at AGRA, I counted that the word partnerships has already been mentioned 31 times. So please keep it going, because I think that is crucial and critical to the solutions that we're trying to implement. AGRA is an international organization, was established by the late Kofi Annan and partners, specifically to drive what you were talking about, Hiham, the green revolution in Africa. But I think as many of the others around the tables in the developing world, what we learned, of course, over the years is that a couple of things. At this point in time, there's a $40 billion investment gap every year in the agriculture sector, both public and private. And what that 40 billion tells us are a couple of things. Number one, if we really want to drive solutions, no actor can go at it alone, being it government, international organization, or even the private sector. Number two, we need to partner, but we need to partner also specifically with the private sector, and specifically for leverage. For every single dollar that any public institution invests in Africa's agriculture sector, being its infrastructure, we almost have to generate a leverage that is tenfold from the private sector. And I want to make it very clear, private sector are not multinationals. It's every actor in the value chain who puts their own equity, their own capital at risk. And that includes our smallholder farmers. That includes our SMEs, who are often the lubricant of holding our value chains together. But they're not well documented. We don't have a lot of insights in their business models other than what we get from our inclusive finance colleagues who talk about the lack of cash flow, the lack of capacity, etc. And it's, of course, our regional champions and players who are emerging. It's our emerging retail sector. It's also the international input companies and off-takers who have been active on the continent for a long time. Our agri and food sector has a $1 trillion potential. So how are we going to untap that, and what can be the role of the private sector in that? And I like to bring it back to simplicity, but also bring it then back to the complexity of it. The role of the private sector will be from bottom up, top down, and from the left to the right, integrated as a committed partner in value chain developments, to our governments, to our SMEs, and to our smallholders, because that's the only way how we're going to unlock that opportunity. We ensure in the work that we do with the private sector, and OCP is one of our committed partners also in that aspect, that we look at what are the different buttons you need to push to be a valuable actor in this ecosystem. Aligning on vision and dialogue, what we're also doing here is critical. So we do organize the largest conference on the continent, and we do it in collaboration with governments and with the private sector actors. And we also make sure that we bring those private sector actors, like the young entrepreneurs, the startups, who are a lot more aggressive and optimistic than any of us here on the table about their continent, that they bring their demands to the table and what they would like to see, and also their aspirations. I think secondly is also leadership. We will not get there without leadership commitment all the way from the top. So I always want to look CEOs in the eyes, whether you're managing 1 billion turnover or 100,000, what is your commitment to building inclusive value chains? I think another aspect is that we have to co-design, and we have to co-invest, and we have to build joint programs, and we have to take them to the ground, and we have to fail, and we have to learn from it, and we have to replicate, and we have to scale. The talk is good, it's a good starting point, but it's not going to get us there. So we really ensure that across the food system, we partner with many different actors, and we translate that into actions, into programs. And we learn a lot, and sometimes it's very frustrating. And if I sit with my partners here, IFAD and OCP, there will be war stories that have been on the front pages of newspapers, and others that we've shuffled back into drawers so that nobody can see it. But we have to do it. We have to create almost like a whole Silicon Valley from the north to the south of inclusive business models, and we have to work on them together. And there are a few other things that we also need to do. I think be also very specific as we start about how we're going to evaluate and track progress. What are the indicators we're going to work on? If we go back 20 years ago, we were measuring different indicators of success than we're measuring now, including AGRA. We will now start measuring also the jobs that we're creating, not just what's the increase in yield for farmers and what is the linkage to markets, how many jobs are we creating? So I really think also that we need to look at what we're measuring as success, and no matter how challenging, let's learn from it and let's reflect on it. I also think knowledge sharing is very critical, and I think you mentioned it in terms of our soil. What do we know about our soil? What are the insights we're gaining? But it also, the other side of the coin is also data. A lot of decisions we make on this continent are not necessarily based on solid data and information. So as private sector, we're partnering with the Microsofts, the Googles, and all these other actors who can help us to mobilize, generate the type of data that our governments require. As AGRA, we are also leading alliances like the Regional Food Balance Sheet, where different actors and partners, including private sector actors, are bringing data about production, volumes, etc., to the table so that governments can make informed decisions about how much food is in their country, how much they can expect. And therefore, the volatility in decision-making about closing borders, opening borders, because there's a fear of food insecurity, we mitigate that risk. I would like to leave it at that. And apologies for my voice. I haven't had a lot of sleep in terms of traveling, but as you can see, I'm very passionate to make things happen.
Yeah, thank you very much for your enthusiasm. If we had time, we could listen to you a lot longer, but the time is running, and I want to keep some time for the questions of the audience. So I will give the floor to Patrick Dupuy, who has been working a lot in Africa with different counterparts. So from you.
So first of all, I thought Jennifer's intervention was absolutely brilliant. I'm congratulating you, so at least, no, but I thought it was brilliant, and a lot of the points I wanted to make, you actually made them. The first one is the investment gap. You mentioned $40 billion. We work in every sector, in every continent in the world. I can tell you, our view is that the dollar you put in the African agriculture is the best dollar you can put anywhere in the world if you are looking at climate and SDGs. Actually, all SDGs, you name it, nutrition, poverty, gender, all SDGs, the dollar put in the African agriculture is the best dollar that the world can put somewhere. Both if you look from the risk side, so the cost of inaction in Africa is the highest. You know, climate adaptation, you know, the do-nothing scenario is not an option because of the, number of African countries who are the highest risk in the world, because the impact on agricultural yields, because the impact on potential climate refugees, and because if you don't increase yields, you have deforestation and you actually create a vicious circle. So the cost of inaction is the highest in Africa, and the cost of action has the highest payback. Both on the climate side, because it's the largest source of carbon farming and carbon sinks, but also on the potential to increase yields and global production. So the highest cost of inaction, the best payback for the cost of action. And that's why the first thing is to make sure that we close the investment gap, because the reality, there have been years and years in the 80s and the 90s of underinvestment and under-innovation in the African agriculture, public, private, you name it. And fortunately, some private and donors are actually started to reverse that trend. And I think OCP is pretty much on the leading edge of that, of having really alerted and then actually to take action. But we really need to take action. We are still very far from where we should be. So that's on the call for action. And I think even on the text we received, I think we need to be a bit more bold about the fact that it's the biggest priority. You know, it's the biggest priority. We should put a little bit of the climate funding that we put in the global north on renewables or whatever, and put more on the African agriculture, even though, as you said, that most of the investment will come locally. That will be from the local private sector. So then on the how can government and private sector, what should they be doing, how we should partner? I see three roles of both private and government. The first one is, and it's mostly government, is enabling the right planning. I think you mentioned, Bertrand, planning is critical. What crops should we be growing? Should we keep on with the top 7, or should we also rethink about some crops that are more water resilient, more resilient to the new climate, that are more nutritious? So we need to reinvent a little bit and come back to the orphan crops from Africa. So the planning is critical, planning of infrastructure, irrigation, and so on. So enabling right planning, and that's mostly, I agree, a government space. But then you have two other priorities where it's both government, private sector, enabling investments, of course, all along the value chain. So the government should make more investment feasible, but actually even the private sector should partner with the private sector. Because most of the time, actually, they all go alone, you know, and if you have the fertilizer, but you don't have the seeds, if you have the seeds, you don't have the water, if you don't have the water, you don't have the transformation, you always have problems, because, you know, it's one is missing and the whole value chain doesn't work. So enabling investments and enabling economies of scale, I think, again, all along the value chain, economies of scale, what does it mean? At the farmer level, it's creating aggregation models, or at least farmer organization, because that creates economies of scale at the smallholder level. Enabling common platforms, fertility maps, nutrient roadmaps, climate impact models, farmer portals. So all these that generate economies of scale, and obviously also economies of scale in the transformation value chain. So on those three priorities, enabling right planning, right investments, economies of scale, also catalyzing investments through blended finance mechanism where everyone is playing his part, but the private sector and the government needs to go there together. And for example, I think the donors community sometimes doesn't play its role, because we all go one by one, and it's a nightmare for ministries of agriculture. We do work with a number of ministries of agriculture. They spend half the time coordinating the donors. So this is really extremely unhelpful. So having aggregators that can actually be the partner of the governments, like OCP sometimes is actually very helpful, and the donors community should first allocate much more of their funds to the African agriculture, but also play the role of making it easier for the governments to actually enabling the economies of scale.
Thank you very much. So we have a roadmap, and we know what to do. We still have some time, so I would like to open the floor for any question in the audience you might have.
all. So to come back to the fridge initiative of my neighbor, what about energy, and especially energy in local places? Because most of the consensus on agricultural issue is that the lack of energy for both crop conservation and transportation is one of the most important driver of the imbalances that could lead to situations where there is a global overproduction but local places where there is no where there is a downfall. It's not a specific question for, but anyone is welcome for.
I don't know if there is another question so that we can bring all together. First, I can see someone. Yeah?
They have the mic. I want to just jump
Please.
quickly. Exactly. So I thank Bertrand also for his great speech. It show that he's an agriculture engineer. He knows very well what he's talking about. And indeed, to answer your question, what we did was used, solar plants to be able to cool and, refrigerate all the crops, but also the production and for the conservation. So it is essential to have energy to be able to have more conservation and preservation and transformation locally. So both the infrastructure, the material for conservation, the energy, and also the transportation, because the logistics to take it to the urban areas from the farms is crucial to be able to have success.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alina Kalon from Sierra Leone. And I'm happy all of the speakers here, you guys know what the issues are, you know where the problem is, and you already know the solution. So for me, I think it's just a matter of action. So one major issue I would like to highlight is there are different aspects in agriculture, and for us we have a fish farm project that we're working on in Sierra Leone. It's a last mile community with no good roads, no electricity. So imagine you're doing a fish farm and there's no electricity. How do you preserve the fish? So these are some of the other areas I think you could look at, and not just crop production but also other areas of agriculture. I mean, it's worth thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you. If I cannot see any more questions. So we have we have three questions and comments around the connection between energy and infrastructure and agriculture, which has been tackled by all of you. And of course, it's a very important point. I would just say that in a way, I've been trying to promote that we invest more in agriculture, because I had seen how much we have invested in energy, for instance, in Africa, because energy is very simple to invest in. I mean, you build a dam, you build a microgrid, it's very easy, and you never have surprise. You never had seeds which do not grow. You do not have a market that doesn't work. But at the same time, your point is very good, is that we've been working in Africa with energy, but not connected to agriculture. So perhaps on this, I would first give the floor to Bertrand, because I know AFD has been working on it, and also to Ségolène, because research has been working on it. But of course, I open to everybody. So perhaps Bertrand on energy and agriculture.
I wouldn't say that we focus specifically in our investments in the energy sector on making a link and having a direct connection between energy investments and agricultural investments. That being said, the way energy infrastructures are developing within Africa provides for what is required in terms of energy in the long term. And the mini-grid, for instance, that you mentioned, the solar panels solutions that are much more efficient as of today and much more productive, provide huge opportunities for agriculture, for mobile payment systems, for information to be provided for agriculture. So it will remain in the coming years a very strong area where countries want to provide electricity and where more investments will be required with very positive effects on agriculture, but it is also true for health, issues and for education issues. If we take the example of education, accessing through the internet online courses is an obvious benefit of what electricity and computers can bring to a given population. And talking about fridges, obviously being able to store medical products within a fridge is also essential to that kind of basic services. So energy as a whole and the Just Energy transition partnerships that have been signed with 2 African countries, be it Senegal and South Africa, also embark on that kind of project. And referring to the discussion I had with Isham this morning, OCP has embarked on a huge transformation of its energy mix, looking at having, with a long-term view, green hydrogen produced to provide energy for your mills and your industrial production sites in Morocco. So that's also something that will have an impact in the long term on the energy that is required for the agricultural field.
Ségolène, shortly.
Yes, very shortly. From a research point of view, I wouldn't say we have all the solution because all the leverage we may use are also context specific, but we have some probably, particularly under the umbrella of the agroecological transition, what is also behind is to produce and to transform system with less energy, with less inputs. So this is a way how to produce more, how to produce a sustainable way, but using less inputs or and this induce less energy. So this is a first remark. And the second one is the bioenergy, of course. And there are several leveraged actions. One is, for instance, the agri-photovoltaism, which is a very promising technology. Another one is also the methanization, the use of biogas on agricultural farms. So there are several leverage of action between under the umbrella of Sarah, for instance. Thank you.
Very much, Ségolène. Jennifer, and then Patrick, and okay, and Charles.
Now, this is an interesting conversation. No, very interesting, and I would like to build upon what you said earlier, Patrick, about a siloed approach. I really like what you brought forward, because when it comes to our farmers and SMEs, they face multiple challenges in complex layers at the same time, and we're not necessarily structured as such to drive a solution. So what we've also seen in our own thinking as AGRA that has been evolving is from looking very siloed at, oh, we provide farmer extension services, so we work in a value chain, we work in a food system, and now we've adopted the bread basket, the corridor approach. Although we will likely not invest in infrastructure, we do realize we're operating in breadbasket agriculture hubs that have multiple layers of challenges. And we have to take this into account when we're planning for our programs. That is one, and we have to seek out those partners that can help drive solutions. So what might not be strange is that in the near future, we might be partnering with somebody who does invest in energy or in infrastructure. And those are parts of the reflections that we have to do as institutions and how we have to change our way of working together to make this a reality. Thank you.
Patrick and then...
Very briefly,
yeah.
On the energy, yes, it's the other thing. I mean, I'm not sure we invested enough because you still have 500 million people in Africa who don't have access to energy. So I think we have a margin before saying that we have invested too much. And just to remind, because we made a parallel with Europe. In Europe, you know, very few citizens paid themselves their energy access. Initially, they paid the OPEX, they didn't pay the CAPEX. So I think we need to also accept that the first investments to provide energy, and there are different ways, you mentioned photovoltaic, mini-grids and new solutions. I think we need to accept that it needs to be partly subsidized. But the problem is, we always come back to the same problem, is that the governments have a debt level which are unacceptable. And so I think we need, as also the global community, to at least make sure we solve that and we create conditions to provide energy, because without energy, no development, no education, no health, and no agriculture.
Yes, and I'll try to be extremely brief, but there's so much that I would have wanted to see discussed if we'd had time, including, for example, what we all hope will come out of the G20 with Brazil, right? Brazil is a world leader in fighting hunger, and clearly President Lula has got that very firmly in his agenda. So hopefully there'll be a renewed commitment from the international community, and I think it's an opportunity with the reform of the MDBs as well to have some renewed focus on agriculture. But I wanted to come back on one key aspect, which is that we need to find a way also throughout all of this to not forget that we need to increase the share of return for farmers and smallholders in particular. I mean, it's great to build great value chains and invest in SMEs but they have to include smallholders, and that's one of the challenges that we have. I mean, one of the programs we're doing in Mozambique was working with farmer organizations directly on value chains for cassava, for red meat, for horticulture, so that this kind of end of the last mile, you were mentioning the last mile. Actually, I was in Sierra Leone a year ago now, and we went to Bo, and clearly the potential is enormous in Sierra Leone. But that reaching those communities, I know no one goes there. Reaching those communities is horrendously difficult. The time it took for us 3-5 hours maybe to do 30 kilometers to reach some of those most remote areas. And clearly, the program that we were looking at, that we'd funded, had transformed the life of the people living in some of those communities. But it was extremely small. There are no SMEs. What there was a sort of group of people driving motorbikes so that they can put 2 or 3 or 4 people on the bike and take them to the next town or next big village, really. And that was it. So that's the kind of investment that we need to see at that very, very, very last end of the mile. And we must not forget that. Otherwise, we can do SDG 2, but if we don't do SDG 1 and reduce poverty for farmers and smallholders in particular, it's not a great outcome for Africa. Over.
Thank you very much. It was so rich. It was really a pleasure to have you around the table. So thank you very much for our speakers. Thank you for the audience. And I will conclude in 3 very short points. The first one is a huge thank you to the Paris Peace Forum, because agriculture is not always on the stage, and we really believe it's a key point when you talk about peace, because you need to have people nourished if you want, and with a future, if you want them to live peacefully with their neighbors. That's the basis. So thank you for organizing this panel. The second point I wanted to share with you is that you have a paper which is a call on the table, and it is surely available on the website of Paris Peace Forum, which is called Africa Can Be a Major Agricultural Power. My institution, CIHAD, has signed it, and other institutions are signing it. So if you're interested, please have it circulated and sign it. And the third point, and this is really my last one, but that's the best one, is that we can go on having this discussion, but in another place, because we have the chance that OCP invites us to a cocktail, so we can go on discussing. Perhaps the place is, I don't know exactly, so...
Right across the hall.
Okay, so that was my last point. So, thank you very much.